Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Janson Lot 107 Wash Processed Panama from Apollon's Gold. And there's the bag right there. And Apollon's Gold, based out of Tokyo, Japan. And they've quickly become our most featured Asian coffee roaster on this channel, largely due to the offerings that they carry throughout the year. We actually picked up this bag of coffee while we were out in Tokyo after the owner of Apollon's Gold called it a game changer. And if there's one coffee that's going to catch my interest, it is a game-changing washed Panamanian geisha. So I'm definitely looking forward to discussing this one, as this right here is day 67. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Apollon's Gold's recipe, which is a 17:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee. So historically speaking, Apollon's Gold has actually been one of, if not the lightest roasting coffee roaster that we have featured on this channel. So it seems like they've tinkered with things a little bit, and they're not quite as light as they used to be in the past. I would say maybe slightly more developed than it once was, but even then it is still on the lighter side of things relative to most other coffee roasters, so I still feel like we call this a very light coffee by most standards and metrics. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 48, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and as expected, it offered an abundance of the classic Panamanian geisha characteristics with an extraordinary high level of clarity, florality, tropical fruits, as well as citrus. But of course, the biggest takeaway I had was just how much cleanliness there was present within this coffee. You'd definitely expect that given what this coffee is, but even then, it just exceeded my expectations ever so slightly in that manner. It did open up a little bit on the cool down with a slight bit more herbality, but for the most part, a pretty nice start. We continue on to day 50, opted for the Chemex, and I felt that this coffee was actually an amazing representation of what Panamanian geishas are capable of, as it continued to offer an immensely clean base right at the forefront with an extremely well-defined jasmine-like aspect, followed by an abundance of tropical aspects, including a listed passion fruit as well as a citric component, but for the most part, a very fresh fruit-forward cup. I was really impressed by this day as I continued to marvel at just how much clarity and definition there was to the cup. We'll get into that a little bit more as we continue day 54. Opted for the April brewer, and the cup continues to come out super floral forward as it has a little bit more of the trademark Apollon's Gold's like delicacy with some slightly nice intensity. Even then, the jasmine aspects were by far the most pronounced component to it, with a bit more of the listed bergamot-like citrus present within the finish. Very nice, not quite as impressive as the previous day. Even then, I was still impressed by the way that this coffee was trending. So we continue on to day 57. Opted for the V60 with Apollon's Gold's recipe, and the cup continues to remain wonderfully clean and floral forward as the jasmine aspects are tremendously well defined, and this is the first opportunity I wanted to take to just really nail that home, just how tremendously well defined and pronounced the jasmine-like aspects were within this coffee. I do have to say, if you've never really tasted jasmine in a coffee, this one right here was an amazing representation of that, because not only was it clean and well defined, but it was extraordinarily well pronounced. So this is one of those things where if you've never really tasted it before, it didn't take an expert to really pull a lot of these things out from this coffee. It did open up a fair bit as it cooled down, with the florality still being the focus, but also a bit of the tropical aspects, the citrus fruits, as well as the listed passion fruit, orange, melon. Overall, a very pretty cup. A lot of the things I'm looking for when it comes to Panamanian geishas. Day 60 opted for the Chemex with Apollon's Gold recipe, and the cup continues to come out amazing as there's perhaps a little bit more delicacy and tameness to the cup relative to some of the other experiences we had had. Florality remains intensely strong as the cup continues to remain very clean and sweet, with much more of the depth felt in a very lively finish, an ever so slight herbality to it with a sweeter fresh fruit and tropical finish within the cup. And then day 63, final notes we have. one more try through the V60 with Apollon's Gold's recipe, and this is the best the coffee's been to this point. Here on day 67, the coffee continues to feel like it's improved ever so slightly, as it offers the slightly grainy citrus that I like to describe as being reminiscent of Fruity Pebbles, and whenever I'm able to experience that in a coffee, it is instantaneously one of my favorite coffees that I've ever had, as it has that as well as a slight Fruit Loop-like aspect within the finish, so a sugary, sweet, sort of citric grain quality to the cup. It continues to remain extremely clean with a high level of fruit and floral sweetness. Jasmine continues to remain extremally prominent with a complementary and defined pronounced fresh fruit aspect, including a sweeter melon, a tropical citrus, and just an overall stunning day. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have 2 level 5s. So let's go through those real quick, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 5. I don't think that will come as a surprise to anybody, given that that's the very first note I discussed about this coffee, the immense clarity that was present right from the start, and at no point was I ever wavering from that level 5, as this one was just immensely clean right from the onset, and that's what you always hope for and expect when it comes to Panamanian geishas, but even then I have to give them even more credit because of just how well defined the cup was in general. So level 5 feels more than justified on this one, if anything, the higher side of that level 5. Florality, level 5. So while the florality is at that level 5, this is one of those classic things where I could say that since it's a relative scale, this one right here honestly could be as high as a level 6, as you could really bump up the florality to a much higher level than we typically experience from pretty much any coffee. I do have to say this is one of the most floral cups of coffee I've ever had in my entire life, and the florality was nice and sweet too, so I just have nothing but positive things to say about the floral aspects as well as the cleanliness. So those 2 level 5s more than justified within this coffee. We have a handful of level 4s. We'll start with the finish, level 4. Yes, it does have a little bit of a kind of delicate finish to it, though it's a very complex finish and not an overly long lasting or a just overbearing finish. So that's why level 4 does seem pretty fitting for it. Though I do have to say maybe the slightly higher side of the level 4, because it does linger ever so slightly with an abundance of complex aspects to the cup. Sweetness, level 4. That's actually on the higher side of level 4. It would have been something if this coffee would have scored at the level 5 for the sweetness, though. This was surprisingly sweet given what this coffee was, and I have to give them more credit for that, because if there are 3 things that really stood out in this coffee, the first 2 of course are going to be the florality and the cleanliness, but the third is going to be the surprisingly high sweetness that was present within it. Then we have a couple of level 4s in the fruit categories. We'll start with the berry fruit, and that's going to be the passion fruit. And I've said in the past that I don't necessarily enjoy those specific types of berries when it comes to coffees in general, but I think this is a little bit of an exception just because it was really marked well by the floral components, and then it was complemented well by the other things that were present within it, including that berry fruit component, which was nice and clean. It was nice and pronounced and still sweet. In addition to that, the citrus, which once again isn't necessarily my favorite thing, especially something like a bergamot, though I was able to get a kind of sweeter orange, sweeter tangerine aspect to it as well. Those things both seem to work well. Also have to give credit in the berry fruit category because there was a sweet melon-like component to it. So a lot of nice positives in that sense. And even though those might not necessarily be my favorite things from coffee, when I was able to experience them in such a sweet and clean, fresh fruit manner, that was a really nice selling point to me on this one. And then we have a couple of level 3s. We'll start with the acidity. Level 3, not necessarily the brightest coffee, but that's never going to be a huge issue with me, as I think we are reviewing one more coffee from Apollon's Gold, and I was making these coffees side by side, so I think that's probably why, if anything, the acidity is slightly toned down. But even then, it wasn't necessarily the brightest coffee in general. Stone fruit, level 3, that's another thing where it was not quite as pronounced as some of the other fruit factors within this coffee, so that kind of stood there around that mark, though I was able to get some of those fresh fruit, stone fruit aspects to this one as well. And then the savoriness, level 3, it's not something that I mentioned too much, though I kind of hinted at a slight herbality to this cup too, given that it was much more of a, we'll just say, background characteristic relative to so many of the other things in this coffee. It felt like it justified that level 3 mark, maybe in a little bit of a tea-like sense. Even then, though, it's still nowhere near as pronounced as some of the other wonderful fruit components and floral components we were experiencing from this coffee. Last thing worth discussing is the body at a level 2. As this one right here had all the potential to maybe be a level 1, sort of a extremely delicate and light-bodied cup of coffee, but it's not necessarily to the extent where we've experienced from some of the other Panamanian geishas we've reviewed. Even then, slight bit of body, just a little bit more texture, just a little bit more depth to this cup. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I think two things of it. One, I don't necessarily think it does this coffee justice, but two, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what we were getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. There is honestly a reason why I wanted to make this one of our final reviews of the year, and that's because I wanted to see if we could fit it into our top 10 coffees of the year list. This one was described as a game changer, and it honestly lived up to all of the hype, as this is one of the most impressive Panamanian geisha coffees that I've ever reviewed on this channel. And one thing I wanted to add to that is that I've been really impressed with a lot of the changes that Apollon's Gold has made over the last year or so, as our early reviews kind of hinted at the fact that I wasn't necessarily enjoying their coffee too much, and a lot of it was a little kind of tame and delicate in a manner that I didn't necessarily enjoy. But the coffees I've had from them recently, both at their actual roastery and the coffees that I've tried outside of it, have really impressed me, and this one right here is no exception. I would not be surprised to see this coffee end up on our top 10 coffees of the year list, though it's going to be kind of interesting because I think as I'm looking at it from the outside, it's going to probably be between this and the Firestone, which was their other washed Panamanian geisha and the Best of Panama winner from the last year. So that makes things really tricky, though this one right here is every bit as good as that one, and it's going to be one of those things where I'm just going to need to make a decision, but I really wanted to get this coffee reviewed before the end of the year. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you're like me, if you love Panamanian geishas and you're looking specifically for those four big factors, clarity most specifically, florality, fruit components, and then sweetness. This one has all four in wonderful abundance, especially the clarity and the florality. Given that this is one of the most floral cups of coffee we've ever reviewed on this channel, I just have nothing but positive things to say about that in that regard. So if you really highlight and emphasize and prioritize floral components in it, this is a great place to start with, and then the other characteristics kind of combine those together with great depth and complexity. There's a lot in this coffee, just like there was with Firestone, and that made it a very fun coffee to experience and drink every single day. And I think that's kind of the best way I can leave this review. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Janson Lot 107 Wash Processed Panama from Apollon's Gold. Thank you for watching.